So we have officially reached the end of what is a very busy September for the IndyCars. It began right at the end of the Great Milwaukee Mile weekend for IndyCars. We went through the Big Machine Music City Grand Prix, and then all hell broke loose in the off-season world, the silly season world. And we've been talking about FBI raids, team ownership shifts, uh, big driver signings, and there's more to come. I think October 1st is another round of contractual new beginnings and some endings, I would imagine. So, probably more announcements coming very soon. But one point in particular that has come up over the last few weeks and really about the last month has been the Dallas street race, which is a big point of contention and debate in the IndyCar world right now, particularly because of its close proximity to Texas Motor Speedway and that cathedral of speed. There's, I think, a lot of unhappy fans right now, a lot of unhappy folks just in general around IndyCar about this move in particular to a street course in the same area. But there's also an argument to be made about why you would move to a street course in the area. So we'll be discussing all of that in this video. Link down in the description, DL500 Club. If you want to talk live with me about Dallas, Andretti, anything you want to talk about, we'll be going live on Wednesday, the last DL500 Club stream until I go to Petit Le Mans 2 weeks from today. So let's talk about Dallas. Last Friday, Racer, I guess, broke the story, although I think Michael Irvin broke it, and it's been out there for a while. But this was the first official confirmation from any outlet that IndyCar is set for a Dallas street race in 2026. The big takeaway from this article, I'm sure you've already read it, but it's been out for 4 days. The big takeaway is that the race is going to take place around Jerry World, which is where the Dallas Cowboys play football. So much for avoiding the NFL, huh? But it makes some sense, and we'll talk about it here in a little bit about an NFL stadium and building a street race around it. One would assume that some of this has to do with the fact that the Miami Dolphins pulled off the Formula One race, and other teams, meaning Jerry Jones, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys, was probably like, well, why don't we have one of those? And obviously, when you can't get Formula One, it seems like the second option is always IndyCar. So IndyCar it is for Jerry World. But as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, and I've mentioned in a couple of videos since this began to really gain steam about another street course in Texas, and then it became a street course in Dallas. It's difficult. It's a really hard look. It's a tough look for IndyCar that they are going specifically to a market that they left in not the best state, with a great race at Texas Motor Speedway in 2023. The fan base really beginning to get back behind that race and support it and get excited for it because the technical package was finally right in the window. The PJ1 had worn off the racetrack to the point where a second groove was very much able to be used. And we saw one of the great races of 2023 and really of the last 10 years at Texas Motor Speedway. Of course, we know now that it was announced the next season, oh yeah, Texas is off the schedule. And now 2 years removed from that, 2026, we are going back to the same area, going to be all flying into the same airport, but it's going to be a street race in Dallas. And another thing about street courses, please, 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 and I guess it helps that you're racing around a stadium because it helped a little bit in Nashville and other places like Miami for Formula One or even Houston back in the day. You can build a quote-unquote real racetrack around a stadium because you have the space to put the pit lane and the front straightaway on the same part of the racetrack. The easiest way you can tell if a street course is going to survive or not is do the pit lane and the front straightaway align on a street course. It's the easiest way to tell. If they have to move the pit lane, if they have to compromise on the pit lane, don't expect it to last longer than 3 years. Just throwing that out there. But there's a huge debate on social media right now, and there has been over the past week. And there's two sides to the argument, and we're going to look at both sides of the argument today because a couple of media members made both sides of the argument, and those being Tony Donahue and Nathan Brown. Tony has the Tony D podcast. Of course, Nathan is the IndyCar writer for the Indy Star, and these two they love chirping at each other on Twitter. Might be one of the best rivalries in IndyCar that we don't talk about, but they have two sides of the coin. They both have valid arguments, and they both have things that I feel need a little bit more context, and some things that are flat out wrong. And we'll talk about both of them here. Obviously, one tweet much bigger than the other. Nathan, I hope the Star picked up the tab on Twitter Blue. So, Tony Donahue first. Dallas street race will be the downfall of Mark Miles. He's already lost plenty of the fan base to add a street course 7 miles from a perfectly good oval that has produced some of the sport's most exciting moments is a miss, in my opinion. Okay, in my opinion, I agree with that last statement. The fact that IndyCar is leaving Texas Motor Speedway to go to a street course is a really difficult look. It's a really difficult thing from a public relations, from a marketing standpoint to overcome because, you know, street courses are always going to be viewed with some level of skepticism. They don't have a great track record of lasting. There are some track records of street courses that never happen, right? You announce them. It looks all well and good, and then they never happen. So there's always skepticism about a street course, but especially so when it is in the same market as a beloved race that you recently left. I mean, this hasn't even had time to breathe, right? We're 1 season removed, I guess 2 now, seasons removed from Texas Motor Speedway being on the IndyCar calendar. We're 2 seasons removed from, as Tony put it, one of the best races we've ever seen in IndyCar racing, especially in the DW12 era. So that's a very difficult, steep hill to climb for IndyCar because there's a ridiculous amount of negativity going into this. And for whatever reason, I don't know why they're waiting on the announcement. They should probably have already announced it to start damage control right now because there's just a lot of people just kind of upset, it feels, in the fan base. Now, here's the first point where I'm going to completely disagree with Tony here. There is no way that a Dallas street race is the downfall of Mark Miles because, and this is really hard, and this is going to come off very harsh. I'm going to make a very harsh statement here, and you're just going to have to hear it, accept it, acknowledge it. Mark Miles is not there for the fans of IndyCar. He does not work for the fans of IndyCar, and based on some of his statements, which have, you know, a bit of like contempt kind of built into them, especially some of the most recent media statements that he said, I really don't think Mark Miles cares what the fans think when he's making decisions. Mark Miles isn't there because the fans like him or he's reliant on the fans to keep his job. Mark Miles keeps his job because of this. Let's go to the NTT Data website. NTT Data, of course, is the title sponsor of the NTT IndyCar series. They have been in the series since Verizon left back, what was that, 2018? They've been around since then. NTT Data was a Mark Miles get. Where are they based? Plano, Texas. A race in Texas pleases NTT. The fact that there hasn't been a race in Texas doesn't please NTT. If you want to keep a title sponsor around that's paying you $20 million a year, let's just throw a number out there, that's how you keep your job if you're Mark Miles, because the fans don't give you, generally speaking, $20 million a year. They definitely don't give it to you in the Texas market. NTT Data does that. So it's a shame that IndyCar racing isn't reliant on the fans. Now, they are reliant on the fans for a couple of races in the season, and none more important are the fans to the Indianapolis 500, because that's the race that pays the bills for the entire rest of the season. The entire rest of the season, Indy 500. And that, of course, is the race that the fans have a huge stake in. That's why you don't have guaranteed starting spots in the Indy 500. It's because of you. Why is Milwaukee back and going to continue as a strong part of this calendar? Because of you. Why is the Nashville race on the oval probably going to continue on the oval for quite a long time? Well, it's because there was a couple of failures on the previous administration of the street course, but you guys did a great job of showing up for that race, and we might keep an oval as the season finale because of you, the fans. Now, unfortunately, because IndyCar didn't put on a good show at Texas Motor Speedway for 4 or 5 years, the fans stopped coming to Texas, and they gave up their leverage. And the fact that Texas Motor Speedway is not back on the calendar and a Dallas street race is because Mark Miles, to keep his job, to keep NTT happy, to keep Roger Penske happy, he found an alternative to keep racing in NTT's backyard. I can't necessarily fault him for that, but his job is not relying on the fans, because the fans, as IndyCar has been structured since Mark Miles came in 2013, is not structured in a way that is reliant on the fans. It's just the way that it is. And it's unfortunate that that's the way that it is, but that's the way that it is. To that point, let's go to what is essentially an article written by Nathan Brown here on Twitter. And we're definitely going to be pausing in between segments of this, because there's a lot to break down here, and a lot of points that, are valid to this argument. While recognizing that the 2023 race at TMS was one of the best IndyCar oval races in quite some time, the loss of that race isn't solely on Penske brass, as many folks are portraying it. We learned a year ago that SMI was no longer okay hosting a spring IndyCar race after only hosting a spring cup race and also promoting the spring COTA race with the same folks. They were pushing for a late summer, early fall date that IndyCar couldn't accommodate in 2024. Okay, so maybe it is not solely on the Penske brass, as Nathan put it. Yes, SMI wanted to change the date. But I think this line is key right here. Texas didn't want to be off of the IndyCar schedule. They wanted a different date. And this is the failure of Penske Entertainment right here with Texas Motor Speedway. The fact that Texas was pushing for a date and did not get a date, Penske Entertainment failed the fans. Straight up, 100% failed the fans. You can't put on a race like that is such a crowd pleaser and not give it a second chance, or a final chance, I guess we'll say, and be able to promote that race and say, look, guys, we fixed it. Fill the stands. Let's do this. Let's save IndyCar at Texas. The fact that there wasn't that opportunity for the fans to do that, and the fact that that particular race wasn't a part of the 2024 schedule, and I get that the schedule was hellacious this year, and it's going to be even worse next year, but that is a failure on Penske Entertainment's part. There is no doubt about it. So it's not solely on them, because SMI did want a date change, but the fact that they still wanted a date and IndyCar couldn't provide it, that's tough. In 25, ending the season 2 weeks earlier and moving to Fox, IndyCar is on track for 14 of the last 18 weekends of the season, starting in May, as I mentioned, hellacious. That, combined with scorching hot day temps and the difficulty of night broadcast slots, currently makes that a hard ask. Correct. And I do agree with that. That's the unfortunate reality of the TV deal that was signed. Again, signed by Penske Entertainment. It takes two to tango. And only so much you can do as Penske, given your commitments that you made those commitments. And same if you're SMI, talking about hosting a race that maybe only barely drew 5 figures in 23. So yes, attendance is always a talking point of the ovals, because ovals are overbuilt. Capacity wise, most ovals were overbuilt for NASCAR at the peak from like 2001 to 2005 5, 6, 7, somewhere around there. They all built all these grandstands expecting the NASCAR peak to keep going up and up and up, and then it crashed. And all of a sudden you have these huge grandstands that even the NASCAR Cup Series struggles to fill. So with an IndyCar crowd, especially one that took some hits like Texas Motor Speedway, again, no denial there. Texas Motor Speedway took a ton of hits in terms of crowd, in terms of support for that race. But I think you can look at the examples of Milwaukee. You can look at the example of Nashville. If you promote the race, if you have the fan base behind a race, if you have some key media figures pushing the race and saying, you guys got to show up, people will show up. Now, I think part of why Milwaukee and Nashville were full is probably because of Texas Motor Speedway, that the fans saw an example of a track that became beloved again, was beloved, fell out of favor, became beloved again, fall off the schedule through really, because the perception is, well, there was only 10,000 people or 15,000 people or whatever at Texas. But let's ask ourselves here something, and this is one of those things that's a button pusher. So, I might be hovering over the target too much here. How many people do you really think show up to a street course? Have you ever seen the size of grandstands at a street course? They're not that big. They're not that tall. They're not that wide. Okay? You can only fit so many people in on a street course. And weekend attendance figures, very misleading. I don't think there are that many street courses that really have that much larger of an audience, save for Long Beach, than your typical oval race. They're just lower down, out of camera sight, and it's hard to judge the crowd because, hey, well, the fence line's filled up, but how long is that fence line if one person per quarter of a mile is standing there? A couple hundred? And the grandstands are 20 rows high and 20 across? I don't know. How many people is that? Is that more or less than Texas? I don't know. And yet, if you're IndyCar and still want to be in the fourth largest market in the country and have a financially viable way to do so, including a partner in the venture, that's probably NTT that he's referring to, or of course it could also be the Dallas Cowboys, or both. Why would you turn that down just because it's 50 minutes and 30 miles from somewhere you'd like to be but can't be right now? That's petty. That's petty. That's petty. What did I say about rivalry? And again, this is a very valid point that Nathan is making here. You can't, if somebody wants to make it work and someone else is being difficult in making it work, I do understand you go with the entity that wants to make it work. And in this case, it was the Dallas Cowboys in Arlington, Texas. Okay, cool. Your hope of attracting new, younger fans to the sport and your hope of sparking interest in new and current sponsors, both in dire needs in the sport, are better off running in the center of a major metro area than at an oval you happened to run an exciting race at 2 years ago for the first time in 5 or more, where you currently struggle to draw 10,000 fans. And both of those hopes are certainly better served running a Dallas street race than skipping the area altogether. Okay, so last point I agree with. I mean, yes, you're better, given the alternative of not running a race at all, running a race in that metro area, sure, you have a better chance of attracting new, younger fans and bringing in new sponsors. I think this is such a fallacy because I've been to most of the IndyCar races. I think the only two I haven't been to in the last 3 years have been Toronto and Portland. It doesn't matter if it's a street course, doesn't matter if it's a road course, doesn't matter if it is a short oval, big oval. The percentage of, whatever demographic you want to say, whether it's young people, old people, whatever, it's almost the same. The good news is the percentage of younger people is going up. I think Formula One and the interest level there with younger people is helping IndyCar. It is rising that tide a little bit. But it doesn't matter where the race is held. It doesn't matter if it's a metro area. I think that's a huge fallacy about street course racing that's always brought up, and I've never seen any actual data to back up that a street course brings in young people. Can young people even afford to live in a downtown area anymore? Like, I can't. Well, and frankly, I don't want to. I mean, I'm a country bumpkin after all. I don't like cities, but I do understand. Like, I don't know. I think that generally speaking, no matter where you race, you're going to see about the same demographic split. Like, the fact that young people aren't showing up to races is not because the race is not coming to them. It's because the interest level of racing isn't drawing young people in. That's just period, end of story. It's not because that I don't get that. I hear that argument so much and I just don't believe it. Because if it were true, most street courses would last longer than 3 years, and they don't. Most street courses are 3 or 4 years at the max and done. This is provable data. Provable data. You can look up any street course and the data is out there. There were all these young people spending all this money and these street courses were raking in the bucks. Most of the schedule would be them. There are currently what? 4 on the schedule? This will be the 5th? I don't know. I know it's not a message that longtime diehards want to hear, but sometimes reasonable circumstances make doing what a loud segment of the fan base wants untenable. And sometimes there's a solution or alternative that's better for the overall health of the sport, even if it's not what's always been the old us, or what sounds most riveting on the sporting side of things. I mean, I don't know. Maybe it's just me. And I do understand what Nathan's saying here. I don't want to like belittle this because I do think it is a valid point that he's making here. But this is first of all, this is a television sport. Let's be honest here. Attendance, yes, looks good, right? But are you trying to make things have an exciting TV product? Well, put it this way. What matters more? If, let's say, 30,000 people show up on race day in Dallas, or if the TV rating is 1.5 million people, what is more valuable to the sport? TV number, attendance. I don't know. I can tell you what is a better TV product between Dallas Street Course, Texas Motor Speedway. What is more likely to get TV eyeballs? I don't know. I don't disagree with the point about the overall health of the sport. But I will say this. If the sporting side isn't riveting, why do we care about the health of the sport? If the sport is no longer interesting, or if the sport isn't doing things that are exciting, why does it matter if it's healthy? That's a tough question to ask, but where's the lie? NASCAR and F1 aren't where they are because the competition itself has the whole fan base on the edge of their collective seats every race. That is true. But I look at it this way, and especially from Formula One's perspective, why is IndyCar copying the most boring elements of F1? Right? If you want to be F1, you need to actually be F1. That means technical innovation. That means 20 races a year. That means racing internationally. That means having a TV show, video game. What are you doing any of these things? You can't just say, oh, we're going to have a street race just like the Miami GP at Jerry World, and we're going to be like Formula. That's not how it works. I've said this before. I've made this example a couple of times. If you want to be F1, you can't build the house on a base of sand. You have to set the foundation to build the beautiful house to welcome the people in. And right now, IndyCar doesn't have that foundation. They don't have a video game. They don't have cars that are interesting or new. They don't have things that strengthen that base to create that house, to build that house and welcome new people. They don't have that. They just don't have that right now. And so, yes, okay, you're trying to be F1 by doing a street race around a football stadium, which, by the way, IndyCar has done at the Meadowlands. They've done it at Houston. They've done it in Texas. They did it in Nashville. Nashville now takes place on an oval. and will for the foreseeable future. I don't know. By no means am I, or anyone really, advocating for a Dallas street race over running at Texas Motor Speedway. The latter isn't feasible right now, which is fair. That is a fair point. There, and again, I probably sounded like I was just ripping Nathan the entire time. I do think Nathan has some solid points there. But I do think there is a little bit of like company line stuff in here. And it's some of those things that I need to kind of push back on a little bit. I mean, kind of like with Tony. I mean, Tony's missing the point too, because the fans are never taken into consideration on these things. So that's what's tough about all of this. I would have a high recommendation here. If you haven't checked this out yet, NASCAR Man History with GP Laps, Jake as the commentator did a great video about the Boston GP. It's very timely, and I would definitely recommend checking it out. Once again, this was a nice long ramble, so I hope you've enjoyed it. I know I'm going to get a lot of comments from people who use Bitmojis on Facebook that say they didn't want to watch the entire thing. Well, you didn't get to this point anyway, so you don't get your shout out. Thank you guys so much for watching DL 500 Club on Wednesday. Let me know your thoughts down in the comments, but I'm sure you already have. We'll see you in the next video.